I never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these stories. You always hear about this kind of stuff happening to other people, but you never expect it to happen to you. My name's Tom, and up until recently, I thought I had a pretty solid marriage. My wife, Megan, and I had been together for 8 years, married for 5. We weren't perfect, who is? But we had built a life together that I thought was strong enough to withstand anything. That was until last week. It all started when Megan came home late from work one night. It wasn't the first time. Her job as a project manager often required long hours, so I didn't think much of it. But something felt different this time. She seemed distant, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. When I asked her if everything was okay, she just shrugged and said she was tired. The next few days were more of the same. Megan would come home, barely say a word to me, and then head straight to bed. It was like living with a stranger. My gut told me something was wrong, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I trusted Megan. At least, I thought I did. Then came the night that shattered everything. We were sitting on the couch, watching some mindless TV show when Megan suddenly turned to me and said, "Tom, we need to talk." The way she said it made my heart skip a beat. Those words never precede anything good. I turned off the TV and faced her, trying to read her expression. She looked nervous, almost scared. But there was something else there too, something that set off alarms in my head. "What's going on, Megan?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She took a deep breath and then dropped the bombshell. "Tom, I've been seeing someone else." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the ground had just dropped out from under me. "What?" was all I could manage to say. Megan's eyes were pleading, but there was also a strange sense of resolve in them. "It just happened. I didn't plan it, but I met someone, and we clicked. I've been with him a few times, and he's amazing." I was in shock. My hands started to tremble, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "Megan, how could you?" She cut me off, her voice desperate now. "Tom, I'm not saying I want to leave you. I still love you, but I love him too. You should accept it if you love me." That was the moment everything snapped. The disbelief, the hurt, the anger, all of it came crashing down on me at once. "You want me to accept this?" I asked, my voice rising with each word. "You think I'm just going to sit here and be okay with you screwing around with some other guy?" Megan's face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. "Get out," I said, my voice cold and hard. "Get out of my house. Now." She tried to protest, to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, but I wasn't listening anymore. I stood up, grabbed her coat from the chair, and threw it at her. I said, "Get out." The look on her face as she realized I wasn't bluffing was one I'll never forget. She stumbled to her feet, grabbed her purse, and walked out the door without another word. The moment the door clicked shut, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind reeling from what had just happened. Megan was gone, and with her, the life we had built together. After Megan left, the silence in the house was deafening. I sat there on the couch for what felt like hours, trying to process everything. My mind was racing, replaying her words over and over. She wanted me to accept it, to just let her have another man in her life. The sheer audacity of it was mind-boggling. I finally forced myself to get up and walked into the kitchen. I needed something, anything, to take the edge off. I poured myself a stiff drink and downed it in one gulp, but it didn't do much to numb the pain. The reality of what had happened was too overwhelming to drown in alcohol. The next few days were a blur. Megan tried calling me, texting me, but I ignored every attempt. I wasn't ready to talk, wasn't ready to even think about what came next. I went through the motions at work, barely managing to keep it together, but inside I was a mess. The thought of her with someone else, of her expecting me to be okay with it, made me sick. Eventually, the anger started to fade, replaced by a crushing sense of loss. This was the woman I had planned to spend the rest of my life with. We had shared dreams, plans, a future, and now, all of that was gone, shattered by her betrayal. But as much as it hurt, I knew I couldn't let it destroy me. Megan had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I wasn't going to be the guy who just rolled over and let life happen to him. No, I was going to take control, start over, and build something new without her. One morning, about a week after Megan left, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. The initial shock had worn off, and while the pain was still there, it was manageable. I knew what I needed to do. First, I contacted a lawyer. I wasn't going to let this drag out any longer than it needed to. Megan had made her bed, and now she could lie in it, alone. The divorce papers were drawn up quickly, and I made sure to protect myself as much as possible. Megan had forfeited any claim she might have had on our life together the moment she decided to cheat. Next, I started making changes around the house. I couldn't stand the thought of living in a place that was so filled with memories of us, so I began to strip it all away. I packed up her things, boxed them up, and left them in the garage. Then I started redecorating. Nothing major, just small changes to make the space feel like mine again. New bed sheets, a fresh coat of paint in the living room, even some new furniture. It was cathartic, like I was reclaiming my life one step at a time. As the days turned into weeks, I began to settle into a new routine. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness was almost unbearable, when the thought of Megan with someone else kept me awake, but I refused to let it break me. I kept reminding myself that I was better off without her, that I deserved better. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends, and even trying out new hobbies to fill the void. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it helped. I was moving forward, little by little, and that was all that mattered. A few months after the breakup, I ran into one of Megan's friends at the grocery store. We made awkward small talk for a few minutes before she dropped a bombshell on me. Megan was living in her car. Apparently, her new relationship hadn't worked out the way she'd hoped, and she was now struggling to get by. The news hit me harder than I expected. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to relish in the fact that she was finally facing the consequences of her actions. But instead, I just felt sad. This wasn't how things were supposed to end. We were supposed to grow old together, not become strangers living separate lives. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Megan, about how everything had gone so wrong. I knew it wasn't my fault. She had made her choices, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. The thought of her sleeping in her car, struggling to make ends meet, tugged at something deep inside me. But I pushed it aside, reminding myself that she had brought this on herself. Still, the news left me feeling unsettled, like a chapter of my life hadn't been fully closed. I knew I needed to move on, to keep rebuilding my life. But there was a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that something was left unfinished. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of determination. I couldn't let Megan's situation drag me back into the past. I had come too far to let her problems become mine again. So, I focused on myself, on my future, and on the life I wanted to build. I decided it was time for a change, a big one. I put the house up for sale. It was filled with too many memories, too many reminders of what had been and what could never be again. I wanted a fresh start, a new place where I could finally leave the past behind. It didn't take long to find a buyer, and before I knew it, I was packing up my things and preparing to move. It was bittersweet, leaving the place where so much of my life had happened, but it was also liberating. I was shedding the last remnants of my old life, making room for something new. I found a small apartment downtown, nothing fancy, but it was mine. The first night I spent there, I felt a strange mix of emotions: fear, excitement, sadness, hope. But most of all, I felt free. Free from the pain, free from the past, free to start over. As I unpacked my things, I came across a photo of Megan and me from happier times. For a moment, I considered throwing it away, but something stopped me. Instead, I placed it in a drawer, out of sight but not forgotten. It was a part of my story, but it wasn't the whole story. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to face whatever came next, and I knew that I was strong enough to handle it. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as I settled into my new life. I threw myself into work, making new connections and exploring the city. I even started dating again. Nothing serious, just casual outings with a few women I met through friends or at work. It was strange at first, putting myself out there after everything that had happened, but it also felt good. It reminded me that life goes on, that there are new experiences to be had and new people to meet. One evening, I was out with some colleagues at a bar when I spotted someone familiar, Megan. She was sitting alone at a table in the corner, nursing a drink and staring blankly at her phone. She looked tired, worn down by life in a way I had never seen before. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I wasn't sure what to do. Part of me wanted to turn away, to pretend I hadn't seen her, but another part of me felt a strange pull to go over and talk to her. Before I could make a decision, she got up and headed for the door. I watched her leave, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Seeing her like that, so different from the confident woman I had once known, stirred something in me, but I pushed it aside, reminding myself that I had moved on, that I was building a new life without her. Still, I couldn't shake the image of her from my mind. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about her more and more, wondering how she was doing, what had happened to bring her to this point. But I knew that reaching out would only complicate things, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. Then, one day, out of the blue, I received a text from Megan. It was short and simple. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep moving forward and leave the past where it belonged. But another part of me was curious, maybe even a little concerned. After a few minutes of deliberation, I decided to meet her. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop downtown, a neutral place where we could talk without any pressure. When I walked in, I spotted her right away. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her cup as she waited for me. I took a deep breath and walked over to her, unsure of what to expect. "Hey," I said as I sat down across from her. "Hey," she replied, her voice soft and tentative. For a few moments, we just sat there in awkward silence, neither of us knowing how to start. Finally, Megan spoke up. "Tom, I know I'm the last person you want to see right now, but I needed to talk to you. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've lost everything because of them. I'm not here to ask for anything. I just needed to apologize." Her words took me by surprise. I had expected excuses, maybe even some attempt to get back together, but not this. She sounded genuine, broken in a way that was hard to fake. I watched her carefully, trying to gauge if this was some sort of manipulation, but all I saw was the shadow of the woman I once knew. "Megan," I began, unsure of where to start. "What happened? How did things get so bad?" She sighed, her eyes downcast. "I don't even know, Tom. After everything fell apart between us, I thought I could just move on, that I could find happiness somewhere else. But it was all a lie. The man I left you for? He was just using me, and when I was no longer convenient, he dumped me. I lost my job because I was too distracted to focus, and now I'm living out of my car, with nothing to show for it." Hearing her story stirred a mix of emotions in me. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction that she was facing the consequences of her actions, but another part of me couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. Despite everything, I had once loved her deeply, and seeing her like this wasn't something I could easily brush aside. "What do you want from me, Megan?" I asked, my tone softening slightly. "Why reach out now?" She looked up at me, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't want anything from you, Tom. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just needed you to know that I regret everything." I sat there, processing her words, trying to figure out how I felt. It would have been easy to lash out, to tell her she deserved everything that had happened to her, but I found that I didn't have the heart for it. The anger that had once burned so brightly had dimmed, replaced by a quiet sadness. "Thank you for saying that," I finally replied. "I don't know what you want me to say, Megan. It's hard to just forget everything that happened, but I appreciate the apology." She nodded, a small, sad smile on her lips. "I understand. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed to say it." We sat in silence for a few moments longer, the weight of everything that had passed between us hanging in the air. I realized that this conversation, as difficult as it was something I had needed too. It was a chance to find some closure, to finally let go of the anger and hurt that had been holding me back. As we finished our coffee and got up to leave, Megan hesitated. "Tom, I know we can never go back to what we were, but I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me." I looked at her, the woman I had once thought I would spend my life with, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. "Maybe one day," I said quietly, "but for now, I think it's best if we both move on." She nodded, understanding, and with a final, lingering look, she turned and walked out of the coffee shop. I watched her go, knowing that this was likely the last time we would ever see each other. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt a strange mix of emotions. The chapter of my life that had been defined by Megan's betrayal was finally closing, and while there was still a lot of pain to work through, I knew that I was on the right path. It was time to move forward, to continue building the life I deserved, free from the shadows of the past. Then, one day, out of the blue, I received a text from Megan. It was short and simple. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep moving forward and leave the past where it belonged. But another part of me was curious to know what she had to say, what had happened to her after all this time. After a few minutes of deliberation, I decided to meet her. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop downtown, a neutral place where we could talk without any pressure. When I walked in, I spotted her right away. She looked different, tired, worn down by life in a way that was hard to ignore. Her once confident demeanor was gone, replaced by something I could only describe as regret. She was fidgeting with her coffee cup, and when she saw me, she gave a small, tentative smile. "Hey," I said as I sat down across from her. "Hey," she replied, her voice soft and hesitant. For a few moments, we just sat there in awkward silence, neither of us knowing how to start. Finally, Megan took a deep breath and began to speak. "Tom, I know I'm the last person you want to see right now, but I needed to talk to you. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've lost everything because of them. I'm not here to ask for anything. I just needed to apologize." Her words took me by surprise. I had expected excuses, maybe even some attempt to get back together, but not this. She sounded genuine, broken in a way I hadn't seen before. I didn't know how to respond, so I just listened. "I thought I could have it all," she continued, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. "I thought I could keep you in my life while pursuing something that made me feel, I don't know, alive, I guess. But I was wrong. So wrong. I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to apologize for." I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, and for a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. But I reminded myself of the pain she had caused me, the betrayal that had shattered my trust in her. "Megan," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "what you did, it was unforgivable. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything we had built together. And now you're sitting here telling me you're sorry, but sorry doesn't change what happened." She nodded, her tears now spilling over onto her cheeks. "I know, Tom. I know I can't undo the past. I wanted you to know that I realize how much I messed up. I'm living with the consequences of my choices every day. I've lost everything, and I have no one to blame but myself." There was a long pause as I absorbed her words. Part of me wanted to lash out, to remind her of all the pain she had caused me, but another part of me recognized the sincerity in her voice. She was broken, and there was no satisfaction in kicking someone who was already down. "I appreciate the apology," I finally said, my voice softer than I intended. "But it doesn't change anything. We're done, Megan. We've both moved on, or at least, I have. I'm trying to rebuild my life, and I think you need to do the same." She looked up at me then, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I understand, Tom. I don't expect anything from you. I needed to say it, to get it off my chest. I'm sorry for everything, and I hope you can find happiness again. I nodded, unsure of what else to say. There was nothing more to discuss, nothing more to resolve. We had said our piece, and now it was time to let go. We sat there in silence for a few more minutes before I finally stood up. Take care of yourself, Megan, I said, my voice gentle but firm. She nodded, her gaze dropping back to the table. You too, Tom. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, feeling a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, but also a sense of closure. It was over, really over, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. As I walked back to my car, I replayed the conversation in my head, trying to make sense of the conflicting emotions swirling inside me. Megan's apology had been unexpected, and it left me with more questions than answers. Why now? Why after all this time? But deep down, I knew the answer. She was trying to find some semblance of peace, just like I was. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. It wasn't my job to fix her or to carry her guilt. That was something she would have to deal with on her own. The drive home was quiet, the streets almost deserted as I made my way through the city. I thought about the life I had built since Megan left, the new apartment, the new friends, the new experiences. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time, I realized that I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I was enough on my own. Over the next few days, I tried to put the meeting with Megan out of my mind, but it wasn't easy. Her words lingered, replaying in my head at the most unexpected times. I found myself wondering how things could have been different, how we could have avoided the pain and heartbreak that had torn us apart. But those thoughts were pointless. The past was the past, and there was no changing it. One evening, as I was going through some old boxes, I came across a photo album from our time together. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, flipping through the pages filled with memories of happier times. There were pictures of vacations, birthdays, random moments captured in time, all of them showing a couple who seemed so in love, so happy. But as I looked closer, I realized that those smiles had started to fade long before Megan's confession. The cracks had been there all along. We had just been too blind to see them. We had grown apart, slowly but surely, until the distance between us was too great to bridge. It was a sobering realization, but it also brought me some measure of peace. We had both made mistakes, and we had both paid the price. There was no use in dwelling on what could have been. All I could do now was move forward and focus on the life I wanted to build for myself. I closed the album and placed it back in the box, sealing it shut. It was time to let go, to finally release the last remnants of the life I had shared with Megan. She was a part of my past, but she didn't have to define my future. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my new life with renewed determination. I focused on work, taking on new projects and responsibilities that kept me busy and engaged. I started going out more, meeting new people, and exploring new interests that I had neglected during my marriage. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when the loneliness crept in, when the weight of the past threatened to pull me under. But I pushed through, reminding myself that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. I had survived the worst, and now it was time to thrive. One evening, while I was out with some friends, I met someone new, Sarah. She was different from Megan in every way. Where Megan had been confident and outgoing, Sarah was quiet and introspective, with a warmth that drew me in immediately. We started talking, and before I knew it, hours had passed. There was no instant spark, no rush of infatuation. But there was something else, something deeper, something real. We exchanged numbers, and over the next few weeks, we began to see more of each other. It was slow, cautious, but it felt right. Sarah and I took our time getting to know each other, building a connection that was based on honesty and mutual respect. There were no games, no hidden agendas. Just two people who had been through their share of heartache and were looking for something genuine. As our relationship grew, I found myself healing in ways I hadn't expected. Sarah's presence in my life was a reminder that love didn't have to be complicated or painful. It could be simple, kind, and supportive. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that I could find happiness again. But even as things with Sarah progressed, I couldn't ignore the lessons I had learned from my time with Megan. Trust had to be earned, and communication was key. I made sure to be open with Sarah about my past, about the fears and insecurities that still lingered. And she listened, never judging, always understanding. In return, Sarah shared her own story, her own struggles, and together, we began to build something new, something that felt real and solid. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was ours, and that was enough. As my relationship with Sarah deepened, I found myself reflecting more on the journey that had brought me to this point. There had been so many moments of pain, so many times when I had doubted myself, questioned my worth, and wondered if I would ever find happiness again. But now, looking back, I realized that every step, every struggle, had been necessary. Megan's betrayal had been a turning point in my life, a moment that had forced me to confront my own weaknesses and insecurities. It had shattered the illusions I had held about love and trust, but it had also made me stronger, more resilient. In Sarah, I found someone who didn't try to fix me or complete me, but who complimented me in a way that felt natural and effortless. We weren't trying to recreate what we had lost in our past relationships. We were building something new, something that was uniquely ours. We spent more time together, going on weekend trips, trying new activities, and simply enjoying each other's company. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about the small, everyday moments that made life meaningful. One night, as we were sitting on the couch, watching a movie, Sarah turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about what might have been? With Megan, I mean?" I hesitated, thinking about how to answer. "I used to," I admitted. For a long time, I couldn't get it out of my head. I kept wondering what I could have done differently, how we could have avoided everything that happened. But now I realize that it's pointless to dwell on the past. It happened, and it's shaped who I am today. But it doesn't define me. Sarah nodded, a thoughtful look on her face. "I get that. I think we all have those what-if moments. But you're right, it's about moving forward, not looking back." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the past lifting just a little more with each passing moment. I knew that I would always carry the scars of what had happened with Megan, but they didn't have to dictate my future. As we sat there, I felt a deep sense of contentment, a feeling that had been absent from my life for far too long. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I was ready to face it with Sarah by my side. Months passed, and my relationship with Sarah continued to grow stronger. We were building a life together, one that was grounded in trust, respect, and a shared understanding of the challenges we had both faced. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of doubt and fear, but we faced them together, knowing that we were stronger as a team. One day, while we were out for a walk, Sarah turned to me with a serious expression on her face. "Tom, I've been thinking about the future." My heart skipped a beat. We had talked about the future in vague terms before, but this felt different, more concrete, more real. "What about it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't want to rush anything," she said, her eyes searching mine. "But I also don't want to waste time. I know we've both been through a lot, and I know that it's made us cautious. But I feel like we've built something really special, and, well, I want to see where it goes." I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of emotions, excitement, fear, hope. "I feel the same way," I said finally. "I'm scared too, but I'm also ready to take that step. I don't want to let fear hold us back." She smiled then, a smile that lit up her entire face. "So, what do you think? Should we take that leap?" I knew what she was asking, and I knew my answer. "Yes," I said, my voice filled with certainty. "Let's do it." And just like that, we took the next step in our journey together. We started looking for a place to live, something that would be ours, not just mine or hers. It was a big step, and it wasn't without its challenges, but we were committed to making it work. As we settled into our new life together, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come since the day Megan had walked out of my life. There had been so much pain, so much uncertainty, but there had also been growth that had led me to this moment, with someone who truly understood and appreciated me. I knew that life would always have its ups and downs, its moments of joy and sorrow. But I also knew that I was no longer defined by my past, no longer haunted by the ghosts of what could have been. I was living in the present, and I was excited for the future. As Sarah and I continued to build our life together, I found myself more at peace than I had been in years. The pain and anger that had once consumed me were fading, replaced by a sense of contentment and purpose. We had created a home together, filled with love, laughter, and a mutual respect that was the foundation of our relationship. But even as I embraced this new chapter in my life, there were still moments when the past would creep in, uninvited. I would find myself thinking about Megan, about the life we had shared, and about the choices that had led us to where we were now. One evening, as Sarah and I were preparing dinner, I decided to open up about those thoughts. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" I began, my tone serious. "Of course," she replied, looking up from the cutting board. "Do you ever think about your ex?" I asked. "About what happened between you two?" She paused, considering her answer. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not in a way that makes me sad or angry anymore. It's more like, I think about what I learned from it, how it helped shape who I am today." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "That's how I feel too. I don't think about Megan because I miss her, or because I wish things had turned out differently. It's more about reflecting on what I've learned, how I've grown since then." Sarah smiled, reaching out to touch my arm. "I think that's a healthy way to look at it, Tom. We all carry pieces of our past with us, but it's how we let those pieces shape our future that really matters." Her words resonated with me, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude for having her in my life. She had a way of grounding me, of helping me see things clearly, even when my emotions threatened to cloud my judgment. That night, as we sat down to dinner, I realized that I had finally reached a place of acceptance. The past was just that, the past. It had played its part in my story, but it no longer controlled my narrative. I was the author of my own life, and I was choosing to write a story filled with love, growth, and new beginnings. As the seasons changed, so did my life with Sarah. We grew closer with each passing day, our bond deepening as we navigated the ups and downs of life together. We celebrated our successes, supported each other through challenges, and continued to build a future that was rooted in trust and mutual respect. One day, as we were out for a walk in the park, Sarah brought up the idea of marriage. It wasn't the first time we had talked about it, but this time, it felt different, more serious, more real. "Tom," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I've been thinking about our future, about where we're headed, and I want to know, is marriage something you see for us?" Her question took me by surprise, but in the best possible way. I had thought about it too, more than once, but I hadn't wanted to rush anything, especially given what we had both been through. "I do," I replied, my heart swelling with emotion. "I see it for us, Sarah. I've thought about it a lot, and I'm ready. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears, the kind that come when you realize that all the pieces of your life are finally falling into place. "I want that too, Tom," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." We stood there in the park, holding each other, both of us overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we were committing to. It wasn't just about marriage. It was about building a life together, about choosing each other every day, through thick and thin. In the weeks that followed, we began to make plans for our future, plans that included marriage, a home, and perhaps even a family. It was exciting, but it was also a little scary. We knew that life was unpredictable, that there would be challenges along the way, but we were ready to face them together. As we planned our wedding, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come since the days of my marriage to Megan. Back then, I had been so focused on what I thought love should be that I had missed the signs of its unraveling. But now, with Sarah, I understood that love was about more than just feelings. It was about commitment, communication, and a willingness to grow together. Our wedding day was a small, intimate affair, surrounded by close friends and family. As I stood at the altar, waiting for Sarah to walk down the aisle, I felt a sense of peace and joy that I had never known before. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one that I was ready to embrace with open arms. When Sarah appeared at the end of the aisle, looking more beautiful than I had ever seen her, I knew without a doubt that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Our vows were simple but heartfelt, a reflection of the love and respect we had for each other. As we exchanged rings, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I had been carrying. This was the closure I had been seeking, the final piece of the puzzle that allowed me to fully move on from the past and step into a future filled with hope and possibility. Our first year of marriage was a whirlwind of new experiences, challenges, and joy. We traveled, explored new hobbies, and continued to build our life together. There were moments of frustration, of course. No relationship is without its ups and downs. But we faced them head-on, always coming back to the foundation of trust and communication that we had built. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch of our new home, watching the sunset, Sarah turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Tom," she said softly, "do you ever think about how different your life is now compared to a few years ago?" I smiled, thinking about the journey I had been on. "All the time," I replied. "Sometimes I can't believe how much has changed, how far I've come. It feels like a different lifetime." She nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I know what you mean. It's amazing how life can take us on these unexpected paths, how something that seemed so devastating at the time can lead to something so beautiful." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. I couldn't agree more. I never imagined that I would find this kind of happiness after everything that happened with Megan. But now, looking back, I realized that everything happened for a reason. It led me to you, to this life we've built together. Sarah leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors of the sunset fade into the night. It was in those quiet moments that I felt the most at peace, the most content with where my life had taken me. As we sat there, I thought about how much I had learned over the years, about love, about resilience, about the importance of letting go of the past in order to embrace the future. I had learned that true happiness didn't come from holding on to what was, but from embracing what could be. In the end, Megan's betrayal had been a catalyst for change, a painful but necessary step on the path to finding myself and, ultimately, finding Sarah. It had taught me that I was stronger than I had ever realized, that I could survive even the deepest of heartaches and come out on the other side, ready to live and love again. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky above us, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life I was living, for the love I had found with Sarah, and for the journey that had brought me here. The past was just a memory now, a chapter in a book that I had long since finished reading. I kissed Sarah's forehead, feeling the warmth of her love surround me. "I'm so glad we found each other," I whispered. "Me too," she replied, her voice filled with love and contentment. "I wouldn't change a thing." And as I held her close, I knew that I wouldn't either. The road to this moment had been long and difficult, but it had led me to the place where I was meant to be, with Sarah, in a life filled with love, hope, and endless possibilities.